An accidental wrong turn can lead to a beautiful destination. This is true on road trips and long walks. It's also true in friendships, where unexpected connections can bloom from miscommunication. One night in Sao Paulo, I went out with my local friend, Isabella. Throughout this 14-month journey through Latin America, my favorite thing about this part of the world is the dancing. In Mexico and Colombia, I learned salsa and bachata. In Brazil, I learned forró for the first time, which looked like a combination of the two, so I picked up the steps quickly. There's something special about partner dancing, the intimate dynamic of leading and following. I love the old-fashioned charm of being asked to dance and having someone take my hand. One of my dance partners that evening was Lucas, a Sao Paulo native who I accidentally mistook for one of Isabella's friends. She introduced me to so many people that evening. My mind was a whirlwind of new faces. Like most Brazilians, Lucas was naturally warm and friendly, so I returned his warmth and friendliness, especially since I believed he was part of Isabella's friend circle. He wore his hair in a crew cut and had a neatly trimmed beard and spoke with a soft, gentle voice. After an hour of dancing, I told him I was tired and was about to walk home when he offered to drive me. The next morning, I messaged Isabella and found out she had never seen him before that evening. I laughed at my mistake and said yes when he asked me out on a date a few days later. Lucas took me to a live music event in downtown Sao Paulo. It rained heavily that evening, which caused serious flooding in some parts of the city. The traffic was unbelievably congested. As we inched closer to the music venue, I suggested we get out of the car and walk. Lucas shook his head no. At this hour, in this part of the city, it was not safe. I checked the time. It was only 9 p.m. The venue was gorgeous, one of the oldest in Sao Paulo, dating back to the 1950s. The wide cobblestone avenue leading to the entrance was lined with homeless people in tents. I asked Lucas if the government provided the tents. He replied no. They were gifts from kind civilians. Many of the buildings were abandoned and covered with graffiti. He seemed embarrassed by this. We arrived just in time before the performance began. I was surprised they played mostly Turkish and Middle Eastern music. I confess I was a bit disappointed. The musicians were superb, but I was expecting to hear Brazilian music. The guests were fashionably dressed, the most elegant I've seen in all of Latin America so far. One woman wore a beautiful green dress with an elaborate hairdo. I looked down and thought how odd her boots were mismatched, before realizing she had a prosthetic leg. She walked slowly, with graceful patience, leaning on the arm of the man she was with. Lucas took me to the beach for our next date. Swimming is one of my favorite things to do. My last dip in the ocean was a few months ago in the Galapagos, so I was excited. He warned me we were not going to a pristine beach surrounded by nature. We were going to Praia Grande, a city beach about an hour and a half outside of Sao Paulo. A few years ago, his aunt bought an apartment by this beach as an investment. We stopped at her house to pick up the keys so we'd have a comfortable place to shower and leave our belongings. It crossed my mind that this man was almost a complete stranger, and later on I'd be alone with him in an apartment. There was an obvious risk here. However, from the moment we met, he treated me with the utmost respect and consideration. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. His aunt lived in his late grandmother's house. He told me his grandmother had 13 sons and his family group chat had over 100 people. The house had 3 bedrooms and a courtyard. It was a large house, but it didn't seem large enough to raise 13 children. There was a separate room in the backyard next to the barbecue that was now used for storage. I assumed it used to be an extra bedroom. His aunts were incredibly kind, and right away offered me a cup of coffee from a large white pitcher, which was always full and ready to receive guests who dropped by on short notice. The ladies of the house were preparing for a party. Apparently, one of Lucas's cousins was proposing to his girlfriend that evening. He tried to keep it a secret, but someone let it slip. The bride-to-be seemed cheerful about the news and went about the party preparations with a glowing smile on her face, so I guess she will say yes. Lucas said they've only been dating for 2 months. We passed several favelas on the drive to the beach. A favela is a Brazilian slum, informally built without following safety codes. He said the government was building safer apartments for the poor so they can move out of the favelas, which looked like they were crumbling more and more each day. Lucas worked for a Korean tech company and recently received a promotion. During our drive to the beach, his former boss called to invite him to play football, to which he politely refused. After hanging up, he told me he owed this man a lot. He believed in his capabilities and gave him his first big chance at a successful career. His new job put him under a lot of pressure since he was now reporting to both the vice president and the CEO. Lucas said the Korean and Brazilian work culture were worlds apart. Koreans placed a stronger emphasis on hierarchy to the point where it was perfectly normal for those higher up to be disrespectful to those below. No one treated him with disrespect, but he witnessed it all the time between his Korean colleagues, and it made him angry. A few years ago, he took Mandarin classes for 6 months. China and Brazil are close trading partners, and there were many Chinese language centers in Sao Paulo. Lucas was in the top 5 of his class, and the prize was a 1-month trip to China. Unfortunately, he broke his foot in a football match the weekend before his departure and could not go. The misfortune left him so bitter, he abandoned his Mandarin studies altogether. The turn of events prompted him to prioritize learning English, which was not widely spoken in Brazil. He had a Chinese neighbor who was always shouting on the phone, but Lucas had already lost most of his Mandarin proficiency and couldn't eavesdrop with any success. I told him it was typical for Chinese people to speak loudly during normal conversations. My own family members did it all the time. His neighbor was probably talking about something mundane like grocery shopping or laundry. An hour and a half later, we arrived at our destination. Lucas was right. The beach was rather dirty, but I didn't mind. Like many city beaches, there was a boardwalk lined with high-rise apartments. The sand was tightly packed and easy to walk on. The water was gray and with a strong current. A few surfers tried their luck, but the waves were too sloppy. The shore was full of happy people enjoying their weekend. I noticed no one ever left their belongings unguarded. There was always someone in the group who remained on shore to stand watch while others swam in the sea. The family apartment was only 1 street away from the beach. There was a wall-to-wall tapestry of the Last Supper in the living room. A sign in the kitchen said, "Bless this mess." Family photos adorned the mantel, along with several figurines of the Virgin Mary. I asked if Lucas was religious because his aunts clearly were. He replied no. He believed in a higher power, but he wasn't Christian. He was 39 years old and had cancer 2 years ago. There was a tumor in his throat. Removing it was an easy procedure, so there was no need for chemotherapy. The experience brought him closer to both his family and his culture. He used to spend his vacations in the United States, but now spent them traveling in Brazil. Granted, Brazil was enormous and diverse. A flight from Sao Paulo to the Amazons was 5 hours long. I was jealous. I don't feel the same level of depth to either of my cultures. I feel a connection to both, yet always feel somewhat like an outsider. On the way back from the beach, we stopped at his aunt's house to return the keys and also to check out the evening festivities. Lucas was on a diet, so he didn't eat any of the barbecue no matter how much his aunts insisted. I was starving, so I filled my plate with rice, pieces of steak, sausage, grilled eggplant, and salad. There was a woman at the grill, diligently cooking the meat. There was a man stationed next to her who cut the meat into small pieces and added them to the buffet table. Children of all ages were playing. One of the bedrooms was used for storing handbags, backpacks, and charging phones. Another was reserved for sleeping infants. Lucas said there was always a newborn at family gatherings. He added, with a hint of disapproval, that pregnancies were usually an accident and almost never planned. His family was unbelievably large. He didn't even recognize everybody because some people brought new boyfriends and girlfriends. I saw 2 Asians in the crowd, both speaking fast Portuguese. The bride-to-be was wearing a skin-tight, short white dress. It looked like she was at her own bachelorette party. Lucas introduced me to one of his many cousins and told him I've been traveling through Latin America for the past year. His cousin said when he was younger, he had the same dream to travel the world. But he got married, became a father, and never left Brazil. A live samba band set up their instruments and began playing. It started raining, but everyone kept dancing. Circumstances were considerably different the next time I saw Lucas. One of his uncles had a heart attack and passed away. I was surprised he wanted to see me the same night he received the terrible news. He wanted to take his mind off the tragedy. He picked me up and took me to a jazz bar in my neighborhood. The restaurant was the epitome of elegance and style. The female patrons were beautifully dressed and made up. It made me wistful of the days when I didn't live out of a suitcase. I was disappointed the band only played American jazz. I was hoping for bossa nova, or at least something in Portuguese. The jazz singer wore a long black sequin dress. Her hands and neck were laden down with sparkling jewelry. She sang the first song with her eyes closed. Lucas said singers use this tactic to get comfortable with the audience. 4 songs later, she sang with her eyes open and often looked out into the crowd. He pointed out the pianist's fingers were deformed, but it didn't stop him from playing beautifully. We ordered salmon carpaccio, chicken empanadas, and chocolate lava cake for dessert. It was the sommelier's birthday, and all patrons were offered a free glass of wine. I usually don't drink at all, but for some reason, I felt like having a glass that evening. Lucas refused because he never drinks and drives. He didn't even take a sip from my glass. His discipline impressed me. The funeral was at 8 the next morning. Lucas wanted to see me right after. He picked me up wearing a white t-shirt and shorts. Apparently, no one showed up dressed in formal black attire. He was in the same subdued mood as last night, but more relaxed. Many people came to the funeral, a testament to all the lives his uncle touched. Lucas asked if I'd eaten yet. I replied no. He asked if it would be all right if he took me to his mother's house, where she was cooking a typical Brazilian lunch. I said yes, I'd love to. How welcoming his family was to strangers in their home. This was the polar opposite to my family, who have always been more exclusive and wary of strangers. Lucas came from humble backgrounds. As a teenager, he discovered his father had a second family. He began coming home later and later, often disappearing for entire weekends. One day he didn't come back. Lucas and his brother started supporting their mother in their early 20s. They bought a house, which they rented out and used the income to pay their mother's rent and living expenses. She lived alone in a small 3-bedroom apartment and had a little dog named Julie. I asked why she never remarried. He replied he didn't know, but assumed she was too disappointed by love and didn't want to try again. I asked if he wanted children, since he was clearly a responsible man who placed high value in family. He replied he was open to it. His mother was a sweet and gentle woman. She wore her brown hair in a messy bun with glasses on her tan face. I wondered what she was like in daily life when she wasn't grieving the death of a close family member. She made rice, beans, potato salad with carrots, and grilled beef. She spoke no English, so Lucas was our translator. I told her, Even though my grandmother and I grew up in vastly different circumstances, we had very similar personalities. She smiled and nodded. I then asked what she liked to do on the weekend. She replied she liked to spend time with her grandchild. I wondered if she hoped for more grandchildren. We finished lunch. I thanked her for her hospitality, and Lucas drove us back to his apartment. I loved being in the car with him, watching the city pass by, listening to Brazilian R&B, and enjoying the air conditioning. My apartment had none, and Sao Paulo was in the middle of a heat wave. He lived in a studio apartment on the 19th floor of a high-rise. One wall had floor-to-ceiling windows with an expansive view of the city. We changed into our bathing suits to go for a swim in the pool downstairs. He lived in the building for over a year, and this was the first time he used it. The building also had a gym and a barbecue area. Lucas remarked it was expensive to live in this neighborhood, but he was at a point in his career where he could enjoy the money he was making. We swam in silence. I wondered if he was thinking about his late uncle. I floated on my back and looked up at the sky. Many apartments had a sturdy net covering the windows. Lucas told me this was to prevent children and pets from falling to their death. We went to an upscale Arabic restaurant for dinner. Sao Paulo has a large Middle Eastern population dating back over a century, which has made significant contributions to the city's culture and economies. We ordered sfihas, which are savory flatbreads topped with minced meat. Lucas told me he once dated a Korean-American girl named Song. They met while he was on vacation in Orlando, Florida. They stayed in touch after he went back to Brazil, and she came to visit him a few months later. To his surprise, she loved it so much, she decided to move there. She got a high-paying job as an English teacher and lived in Sao Paulo for 5 years. Lucas was dating a Brazilian woman at the time and decided to end his relationship to pursue Song instead. Not because he believed her to be more compatible, she was simply too exotic and exciting to pass up. Unfortunately, their romance did not last. She became swept up in the nightlife of Sao Paulo and lost interest in having a steady relationship. After they broke up, he decided to return to his Brazilian ex, who now had a baby from another man, who had no interest in being with her or raising their child. Her circumstances did not discourage Lucas. In fact, he instantly felt a strong connection with the child and insisted they continue their relationship, which lasted 5 years. Her father didn't approve and interfered until Lucas could not take it anymore and ended the relationship. The woman was now married and had a second child with her new husband. I wondered what it was about Lucas that her father disapproved of. I told him when I was a teenager, my father warned me that no man wanted a woman who already had a child. Lucas said this may be true for some men, but it wasn't for many others. After dinner, he took me to a park next to his corporate office. His company provided the best health insurance in Brazil and a monthly stipend for lunch. His commute to work was only a 10 to 15 minute drive, which was incredible for Sao Paulo. It was clear he was proud of working in a luxurious skyscraper, surrounded by perfectly manicured green spaces. I remember feeling a similar sense of pride when I got my first job, which was in a tall skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. I must have looked bored because he laughed and asked, "You're not impressed by any of this, are you?" He was right. I wasn't. But I replied, "I'm happy for your success, but I made different career choices in life, so I could avoid office buildings completely." To be polite, I made a few compliments on the surrounding skyscrapers. One in particular looked like a spaceship. A friend of his recently told him about a job opening at his company and recommended Lucas for the position. The job was in his field of specialty, Brazilian government relations. He'd earn a higher salary, but it would require more overtime, and he'd have to move to Rio. The idea of leaving his family made him apprehensive. He had no friends in Rio either. I told him this meant his network would expand. and he'd become even more knowledgeable of his country. I also reminded him, even though this was a big change, he would still be living in Brazil, speaking his native language and surrounded by his people. Imagine the culture gap if he had to relocate to London or Hong Kong, where the distance from his family would be even greater. He looked thoughtful and nodded slowly. I recently finished rereading Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. The story follows Jamie, a beautiful, young, mixed-race woman in the early 1900s. Unfulfilled by her first 2 marriages, she searches for authentic love, understanding, and defining happiness on her own terms. I thought about Lucas's mother and the agony she must have felt when her husband abandoned her and their 2 children. Then I thought about Lucas and the heavy responsibility he took on at such a young age, shouldering burdens far beyond his years. There are over 28 million people in Sao Paulo. The spark of these 2 lives burned brightly in my mind. On my last night in Sao Paulo, he took me to a restaurant downtown owned by his close friend. It was a trendy hotspot, so there was a bit of a wait. We ordered coxinhas, which were deep-fried, teardrop-shaped croquettes, typically filled with shredded chicken, but these were filled with pastrami. How whimsical, I thought. He joked he can get his diet back on track once I leave Brazil. He spent most of his free time with me in the past 2 weeks. Every weekend, his friends sent him message after message asking where he was, inviting him to parties and bars, only to have him apologize and refuse because he had plans with me. I was flattered at the priority and a little bit guilty for throwing his routine off balance. After 30 minutes, the waiter seated us and we ordered eggplant French fries, which I didn't like because the batter was too sweet. We ate half the eggplant and ordered steak tartare, which was raw ground beef seasoned with salt, pepper, and often served with raw egg yolk on top. The last time I had steak tartare was in Paris, many years ago. I found the concept strange, but it was undeniably tasty. I told Lucas I was a bit hesitant to eat raw beef, especially since I was boarding a flight early the next morning. He replied it wasn't really raw. The meat is marinated in lemon juice, similar to ceviche. The dish came with a side of crispy onions and a green salad. It was indeed delicious, and I did not get sick. I considered kissing Lucas on the lips when he dropped me off. I imagined him to be a passionate lover who enjoyed giving pleasure. But I decided not to cross that bridge. Lucas said I probably do things like this all the time, going out with a complete stranger in a foreign country. And he was correct. I did. But for him, it was a new and rare experience. He told me he didn't handle short-term relationships well. He disliked people coming and going in his life. It was difficult for his heart. It wasn't easy for me either. But transience is the reality of the path I've chosen during this period of my life. I kissed him on the cheek, and we said goodbye. I almost didn't come to Brazil, and I'm so glad I did. Traveling alone long-term has its low points. Find out how I manage a dip in my mental health in this video, where I get the blues in Argentina.